Okay, in just a moment, we are going to learn how records are pressed from Final Me Please. Coming right up.
Yeah, everybody, Scotty G here from ListenUp. I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight. I've sent out a few of these. This is something fun, something special for me. If you're record guys, gals, it's really cool having a pressing plant here in Denver. And Gary is with a company called VMP, correct?
Vinyl Media Pressing.
Yeah, Vinyl Media Pressing. If you can give a little background on who he is and what he's got in store. So have fun. Thanks again for showing up.
Hello. So I'm Gary Salstrom. I've been doing pressing vinyl basically since I got out of high school. I went someplace to go to school and found that I got a part-time job and I preferred that. So I guess school wasn't for me. But anyway, that was at a plant called Wakefield Manufacturing, which was a very famous plant back in the 80s for quality. Did the ECM label, Angel Records. It was a pretty amazing place to start at. They closed in '89. I went to RTI in Camarillo, California, and spent a lot of time there, about 20 years. And the educational process just continued because they're a brilliant pressing plant as well. And then, for reasons I won't go into, I went to Salina with my wife and daughter and started up a pressing plant called Quality Record Pressing for a company called,
That was you?
That was me. I'm guilty. Yes. So, which I'm very proud of because the accomplishments there, not everything was perfect, but we've accomplished some really great things there. I'm here to continue that on and get it even better. Vinyl Me Please is the company that started all this, getting a pressing plant going. They're a subscription service that has about 30,000 subscribers. They have a bunch of records they sell, and then they have records of the month that they sell every month. They ran into issues with getting vinyl. They were pressing at GZ in the Czech Republic, which is a gigantic, monstrous pressing plant that I've never been into. I've just seen pictures. But they did a pretty good job overall, but they're not really geared to consistent quality. And getting records from the Czech Republic to North Carolina, where they warehouse and distribute the records, was very expensive and very problematic. The consistency of the records weren't quite up there either, so that kind of prompted, why don't we start our own pressing plant? And they approached me in Salina, and it sounded great. I love Denver, love being next to the mountains, and it was just kind of a no-brainer for my wife and I. So that's where Quality Record, I'm sorry, old habits die hard. Vinyl Media Pressing comes from. We're a separate entity from Vinyl Me Please, but we're very closely connected. And probably 90% or more of the records that we press will be for them. And then Dave Rawlings and Gillian Welch, who have their own Oconee label. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but very, very well-known artists in their own right in Nashville. Dave, I pressed records for, we pressed records for in Salina, and developed a very good relationship with him. And when I came out here, he came out with us, and he's the primary, well, he didn't come out with us, but he's bringing his business out here. He's the primary, they are the primary financial backers for the plant. Great people. And then we're doing pressing for a small amount for a company called Q Prime, who's a management company for groups like Disturbed, Metallica, and some smaller bands. I'm sorry, similar bands, a lot of different bands. But primarily Vinyl Me Please. So I'm going to skip through this because this has been kind of a dud, but this is a video that's, if anybody wants to see it, I'll be happy to show it to them. But if Vinyl Me Please put that together, their thing is that their moniker is Lost Sounds Found. And the idea is that there's a lot of sounds out there that have been forgotten or haven't been discovered. Obviously somebody discovered it because they recorded it, but they want to rediscover this music, along with things like 8-record set of John Coltrane, Love Supreme, which we're going to be doing, which is going to be an incredible set. They're doing Willie Colon. I mean, these people I've never heard of, which really makes it fascinating for me, that they're all across the spectrum of different types of music. These guys right here, this is where we started at. My first thought was, I need to get people out here that have some experience to start with. The people that I start building the team with, one of which is right here, Rob. He used to work with me at QRP in Salina for years and then left to go to another plant. And my entire time since he left was, how do I get Rob back? So when we decided 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, to start this plant out here, I called Rob and he said, when do you want me? Just tell me. And he's here now. So thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
The guy next to him, Rob is the one with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's rumored to like the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No.
And that's Mark Huggett next to him, who I worked with back since about 1978 at Wakefield. He's a brilliant mind for the piping systems and how to make this all work, because it's quite a dance that's involved. Our goal is to have consistent records from beginning to end of an order. And to do that, you have to have consistent steam, water, all of the presses have to be working consistently. That's kind of his brainchild, is the way this plant is put together, the piping systems. It's pretty amazing. You may not know what you're looking at when you go in there, but that's Mark. The guy to the right is Darren, who used to work at QRP, a brilliant fabricator, mechanic. He's gonna critique himself that some of those slots are a little bit uneven. That's because I asked him to do that, so I'm gonna make an excuse for him. But the lady to the left is Jillian Parker. She's coming to work with us, and then Jim Netter, who I don't have a picture of there, I worked with for a lot of years. He has a lot of experience in the record industry. He's coming out to help me administrate the whole thing. He's in Salina still, but he comes out every couple of weeks. So anyway, the whole idea was who you surround yourself with, people of like mind. None of us are reactionary. We all like, okay, there's a problem. How do we fix it? We made a mistake. Where do we go from here? We're not going to wallow around and, might slap them around a little. No, I wouldn't. I would never do that. But sorry, that wasn't even funny. But
Yeah.
but so, and then this is the core group, right? Mark's here until the plant's up and running, and then he's going to go back to Arizona and retire for the third time, because I keep bringing him out of retirement to build plants. To get a core group of people that can work together well as a team and have common goals and all be into vinyl at the same time. And then we're going to surround ourselves with people from the local area. And I think Denver is going to, I'm already finding that a lot of people there's a lot of really good potential people that are interested in coming. So that's how we're starting. We have all this fancy equipment and everything, which is great and it's awesome and it's a privilege to be able to use it. But without the people, record pressing is very difficult without decent people. And that's the problem with a lot of plants. When you see problems, it's usually people related. When you play a record and there's a problem, usually it comes back to somebody missed something or did something wrong. Not that they probably weren't taught. Who knows what the reason is, but I won't dwell on that. So the process starts with what's called a lacquer master. This gentleman is Ryan Smith. He works for a company called Sterling Mastering, this facility happens to be in Nashville. That's where they do all the cutting. The lacquer is on that platform down at the bottom, and you can see the groove starting to develop out on the outer edge of that. What has happened is he's got music being fed into a board where they do maybe some minor EQing, or depending on what they need to do to get it to where they feel like it needs to sound. They usually, like on Coltrane Love Supreme, he'd probably have one of the original pressings, and he's seeing what he can do with it and maybe he can eke out a little bit more that we really didn't know about, because the equipment's so much better these days. So anyway, that groove is getting cut. It's a spiral. It goes through that board. I'm sorry, I started to tell you that. And then it goes to cutting amplifiers. The cutting amplifiers feed the signal to a cutter head that has a sapphire tip stylus that cuts that groove. In some cases, in his case, it's a diamond tip stylus. But it's cutting that groove. And it's really critical that this step, we can only be as good as the mastering. And so our goal, what our job is to recreate or to have as little loss as possible from what Ryan or Kevin the other mastering engineers, what they put down on that disc. Our job is to keep it at that level as close as we can. Now, different materials sound different, so it's kind of interesting when you get down the road. There's a groove right there. On the left, you can see the dark areas. If you've never seen a groove before, a lot of people haven't, so I thought I'd put this in. Here's the land. There's the shoulder, right and left channels. And the stylus runs down the middle of that groove, and you see the wiggling there. There's vertical and horizontal information in that groove that constitutes the music, okay? So that stylus, when it plays back, the idea is that the mastering engineer in the pressing plant has done a suitable job that you're not going to skip or have any defects. That's an electron microscope, so that's a really close up, obviously, on the right. But I just thought that was a pretty fascinating photograph of the groove where you can see the modulation. We get that lacquer, it needs to be conductive because we're going to plate nickel onto it to be able to get that to the point of pressing a record, okay? So that lacquer, to make it conductive, we use silver, which is the cheapest, best way to do it. You spray silver onto this lacquer. There's way more expensive ways to do it, but this seemed to be very suitable for what we're doing. So that the constituents are three different parts. One, there's a two-headed spray head that you can't spray gun, and you see the right spray nozzle up in the top left. What's happening is one nozzle is spraying dextrose, which is a reducer, with some added, a few added things to it, but basically it's dextrose. The other is sodium hydroxide mixed with silver nitrate. The sodium hydroxide acts as a buffer. What happens is you keep those two separate, and then you spray. The only time they're together is when it sprays through these two heads. They're aimed to converge on the surface of the lacquer, and then you have the metallization that the silver drops out onto the surface. There are several things that are done to the lacquer before we get to that point to make it accept the silver, but that's basically the process. And then we pre-plate the lacquer, which isn't up here. A low temperature, low amperage bath of nickel sulfamate. All of our plating is done with nickel sulfamate. We plate at low amperage meaning it's a 6-position tank, so we start off 1 amp per part, so 6 amps. And then over about an hour and a half period, slowly raise that up to about 20 amps. So a little over 3 amps per part. Once it gets to a thickness, we get it to a certain thickness, and there's no danger of, two of the things that can happen with a lacquer that sits or is exposed to heat is you can develop pre-echo, which I'm sure we've all heard when we played a record, and high frequency loss, which sometimes we don't know if we have high frequency loss unless we have something to compare it to. But those are the two things that happen, and my goal is to not allow that to happen. So I get the lacquer as early as possible in the morning, the first delivery from FedEx, from Ryan in this case, and then that lacquer goes into the tank as quickly as possible. Once that buildup, I put it into the tank here. It's called a rotary tank. I run it up to 100 amps because it's just a buildup of nickel at that point. Okay, so the surface, we hopefully have replicated that with a nice fine grain nickel, and then we build up from there. We want it fairly thick, and there's some samples over there on the table there, but you want it thick enough to be able to handle and not crease and damage, and they're fairly easy. If you're rough enough, you can damage them pretty easily. Nickel's fairly soft. The bottom right is after that lacquer's been plated, we get it's a nickel master at that point that I'm peeling off there. The silver goes from the lacquer to the nickel master. My thing is I leave the silver on the master when I make the next part, which is called a mother. You can have some high frequency loss, from really high frequency loss, the high frequencies, I'm sorry, loss if you don't take that silver off. It's been proven over and over. So it's easier to take the silver off, strip it off and go from nickel to nickel. But sometimes that's the easiest isn't the best. So we plate from that and make what's called a mother. Now the lacquer is like a record. where you can play that just like a record. The groove is down, the stylus fits down into that V. You get to the master, the groove's sticking out. There is a stylus that's made to play it, but it's not worth it because the fidelity is so terrible and it's really hard to play back. So the next part you make, I'm calling the mother. The groove is back to playable again. It's that down to that V. So I play bits of the mother, make sure that there's no general surface damage, anything that might have happened in the silvering process or in the making the master or making the mother even. So I'll play bits of it, and then it's ready to make a stamper, which would be the next step. The other thing is, and generally I don't do it until I have a test pressing with notes. We'll send the test pressing out to the artist or the label, whichever has been decided. And they say at 1 minute, 20 seconds in the first track, there's a tick. I'll go back and find that if it's really there. Sometimes it's dust or a pressing defect. I'll go back there and I can go to the mother and repair that using a microscope and a little tool to dig it out. So, which is kind of fun. Not too many of us do that. It's partly my age. This is not something the newer guys know about. So the stamper is pulled off the mother. The stamper is back to being the groove out. Okay, it's going to imprint that groove into the vinyl. Okay, so it's got to stick out, right? Because we want a record that you can play. You don't want ridges for grooves, right? So that stamper is pulled off of that mother, and then it has to be finished to fit into our dies that press the records. Okay, so here's what the stamper. Okay, so these are kind of rough photos, but the top one is the stamper. It started out 14-inch flat. Okay, and there's samples of those over there too. We have to optically center the stamper because you want the stamper perfectly centered before it goes out to the press. That doesn't mean it's going to be centered, but it makes it a lot easier at the press to start with a centered stamper. Okay, and then it gets back sanded using a special orbital sander that has been developed from the Blu-ray industry to adapt it to record pressing. And then it's formed. So you see the center collar and the outside edge. That's all to mount it onto the die to make it fit onto that and be able to lock it down. Ideally, you don't want any movement in those areas. There is some movement in the stamper, but that's kind of managed from the pressure of the vinyl. That stamper, and this is Rob right here, that goes into this press. So it's a hydraulic press with a extruder. The vinyl is fed using a hopper. It's pellets, and there's some of that over there as well. It feeds down into this, it's called a vertical screw. It's actually at an angle, but the vinyl is pushed with an auger screw through this barrel that is heated electrically to about 315 degrees by the time it gets out. So you want all those pellets to make a homogeneous mixture. And there's actually a biscuit over there. It'll kind of give you an idea. There's a stamper on the top die and the stamper on the bottom die, and they're parallel to each other. The biscuit of vinyl goes into the center, and then you have the hydraulic press closed with labels on each side, by the way. The labels get pressed into the record, and you develop about 150 tons of pressure in these presses. And it squeezes the vinyl. I'll show you a picture in a second, but the molds are channeled so that the steam can travel inside the molds and the cooling water. So the steam to promote the vinyl to spread across the surface of the stamper, which can be kind of difficult depending on the cut and the dynamic range of the recording, because you've got a lot of barriers spreading across that stamper, right, that want to block that vinyl. So the key is to get it to the temperature that promotes that spread and fills all the groove. There's the mold that the stamper gets mounted onto. This is a mold that went bad. You can see the parts that are missing up in the top, and then right down below the center, it started delaminating, and this was a mold that we used in Salina, and we couldn't figure out why we were getting uneven heating until we had a local machine shop cut the top off, because it's not very often that you get to see the inside of the mold. So we found that the delamination was allowing the silver to go under the channels and just spread, chaotically. It wasn't controlled at all. So you can see the ports where the steam goes in, the steam comes out. There's an inlet and outlet on the bottom. And then the cooling water, which brings the vinyl down to, in the pressing process, the record gets up to about almost 200 degrees. The vinyl is cooling down as you go. But the cooling water brings it down to about 105 degrees, depending on the weight of the record. The heavier the record, the higher the temperature of the exit as the record exits the press. And that controls everything right there. So we have boilers that provide our steam, and then we have a chiller that provides the cooling water, about 74 degrees. And that's it for the manufacturing part of it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them if I missed over any. Yes?
I've bought records before, where they have a tick in them,
Mhm.
drives you nuts. It's in a quiet part of a record. I'm like, all right, I'll buy another one. It has a tick in the exact same
Yeah.
spot. Is that the type of thing that you're saying that you're
Yeah.
correct?
That's something that should be repaired. Yeah.
Yeah,
And not to say that, that's pretty common,
Mhm.
but also either somebody missed it at the test pressing,
Mhm.
and it wasn't pointed out, or like in the QC teams that I have, if we find that while it's at press,
Mhm.
I'll repair that and we'll go back with new stamper. But if the stamper's damaged, it can be scratched. Handling.
Well, you didn't mention anything in this process about controlling dust.
Yeah.
I assume that's got to be part of it as well.
Well, and this is going to be the most controlled environment I've ever been in. We'll actually have closed doors. A lot of plants operate with open doors. It's kind of interesting.
But couldn't
but
dust just get in there? And
It can, yeah, it can.
And the other thing that I think about is that, I played on an album when I was younger and I was a professional musician,
Mhm.
and we got to go to the plant, which was kind of cool. This is when vinyl was kind of declining.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think, this is so difficult that I'm surprised people did it.
Yeah. A lot of people shouldn't have been doing it.
Well, yeah. Well, this was,
But no, you're right. You're right. That was a flippant answer to what you said, but
I didn't find it flippant, but it's just, this was not a major release. This was just an indie punk
Yeah.
band I was in.
yeah,
And I was thinking, at the time, it wasn't that expensive to press a record.
yeah.
And I was thinking about it, and I was just looking at it going, how can they spend all this effort to make something and not charge?
Well, okay, so there's plants that are, excuse me again, there's plants that are volume based,
I assume that's what this was, yeah.
and this probably was, and their whole mission is to get those records out of the plant. They're charging such a little amount because you're gonna get what you're paying for somewhat.
But it still
That's
takes
some-
time.
It still takes time,
Even
yeah.
like, we only ordered like 5,000 records,
Mhm.
and it seemed like it would take a lot of time to make 5,000 records.
Yeah, well, I mean, you figure about a record, depending on the weight, a record about every 30 seconds.
But that's slow. It really is.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean-
A CD's seconds.
Yes.
So, yeah, but we're not making CDs, so.
Yeah, good.
And our cycle times are actually, I care about the cycle time. But to me, like if we're doing a 180 gram record and it comes out 200 grams, my primary goal is how does it sound? If it's a little heavy, so what?
Well, would anybody care?
They shouldn't.
No, I mean.
But you know what, if a 180 gram record is 175,
Oh, yeah. you
I
can
get a
hear
lot
about
of
it.
that, yeah.
Somebody's gonna weigh it,
but
you can hear
so my goal is to be within 10% of the weight,
Mhm.
but primarily having a good sounding record.
And what it sounds like you're saying is that caring about what you're doing is probably the difference between these great pressings and these mediocre.
Sure, I mean, I don't want to diss anybody, but
Oh, no.
some people are there just to make a paycheck. I've made it kind of my life,
Yeah.
and I take it way too seriously. You'd probably agree, although you and I are like mine, so.
Well, but if you think about it, if you create this amazing pressing, it's, it might seem like something you did in a day, but, music affects people for years and how they interact with things.
Yeah,
Imagine that your version, because most people have multiple pressings of a record they really love and have it on streaming CD and but this is the one.
hmm
And yours could be.
And we've
that
done a
way.
few of those, yeah. Yeah.
Gary, just real quick, I used to work here, I think we
Yes.
discussed earlier. Where do you see it going from here? How can it get even better? Is it more control? Is it the environment?
The material, for one thing, the vinyl, there's always room for improvement there.
Okay.
Purity of the vinyl.
Not just that, but formulation. And that's something Casey Gibson, who owns the company that we get the vinyl from. He's a brilliant chemical engineer. We're constantly working on the formulation and trying to improve it and get it. The whole goal is that we don't want to do anything to the music, but we want the background to be as dark as possible. I don't want you to hear anything that distracts you from the music. That's my goal. Did that answer what you? I forgot the question by the time I was
No, I
done.
was just saying, where do you see it going from here?
Oh,
You
I
mentioned it,
think there's a lot of room.
and control.
Consistency is another thing. A lot of plants aren't very consistent. They can press a really good record one day and kind of a crappy one the next.
So
I don't want to be there. I want to, we need to be consistent, but we're always working at different things. And I don't know, tomorrow we might find a different way that might improve records a little bit. It's a frontier that I'm open to. I don't really have an answer. I know there's things that I want to work on.
So there's some material out there that's incredibly expensive that would sound a hell of a lot better.
We're working on it.
I'm working on you.
No, Casey's going to come out when we start up, and he's got some. We've already got some sample vinyl sitting on the floor that I can't wait to get started on.
Barbie doll.
One special to Vinyl Me Please. So, yes.
Can I ask about like the cutting the lacquer?
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about cutting it, is it simply dragging that diamond stylus?
No,
Or is it more like a router kind of?
what happens is it's cutting through that. It's almost like running your finger through sand, but there's a chip that develops behind as it's digging that out. There's a vacuum that pulls that chip up as the stylus is cutting into the lacquer. And that's critical, because if that's not pulled up properly, you'll hear noise. So that's critical to the process.
Is it a spinning thing, or is it simply a dragging lacquer soft enough just to pull it through to get that?
Is the lacquer turning?
No, the stylus, is it like a router bit, or is it
like a
just
knife?
dragging through?
Well,
Shape of it?
okay, so it's vibrating with that signal that's coming through the cutter amps, right?
Yep.
So it's vibrating up and down, side to side.
Just like you would play a record.
Exactly. And so think of it as playing a record, but you're actually cutting the groove into the lacquer.
You don't let it bounce, you hold it.
It stays down. You have a certain depth that he puts it at. And like most lead-ins and spreads and runouts are the same depth they should be. And then the music is, the depth controls how far you can go into the side. They want to use as little of the side as possible.
You just take the penny on top.
Well, a nickel. Yeah. I hope that answered. Okay.
Is that cutting depth when they're, like if a record is cut too deep or too shallow, I assume that's bad as well?
Yeah, because it's all about what's in that modulation. I mean, the mastering engineer has a lot of control on how that record's going to come out. And there's a wide variety of mastering engineers out there. And there's about 5 or 6 of them that are head and shoulders above everybody else, partly because they care more than some of the others. But you had a question?
How many records can you press off of a stamper before you have to replace the stamper?
That's a really good question, and that varies. Say we did all the Jimi Hendrix records out in Salina, and you can get a lot more stampers or records out of a set of stampers than you would with a Scheherazade, basically, where the wide dynamic range from really low. I'm sure we all know what dynamic range is, so I won't explain it. But there's a lot more openings for problems to develop that you can hear it. Jimi Hendrix, if you start developing any noises, a lot of it's covered up. Not all of it. I just use Jimi Hendrix as an example. I love his music, but that's an example of one that will last quite a while. The really high-end stuff that we do out at QRP that will be a lot of similar here, like the Stevie Ray Vaughan's, the 200-gram stuff that we do out in Salina. That act of pressing a 200-gram record will wear the stamper out pretty quickly. So probably 500 to 750 records.
Wow.
And then 1,000 or more on some titles.
Does the elevation make any difference here?
Does the what?
Does the elevation make any difference?
We're going to find out.
Uh-oh.
I mean, yeah, I hope it's positive. There's a plant outside of Guadalajara that Technicolor started that is at elevation, and they seem to be having pretty good success. So, but I've been asked that a lot. We don't know. It's never been done in the United States at a high elevation.
And then what color sounds the best for the record?
I think the transparents. I like clear, transparent red, blue, green. I think the transparents are the best colors. And we're going to work on getting the opaques, the colors. We're trying to get them all on the same footing. Now, a transparent color is going to sound totally different than a black record if you had both of them to play, because they're different materials, different surfaces. One's a little bit harder than the other. You might get a little bit more warmth out of the black depending on what type of vinyl that is. And we're working with a lot of different formulations, and we'll do the same with the colors. You'd be shocked at how much difference formulation can come out from one to another. Like a real soft, almost not a very emotional feel to a overly bright. You know, and we're trying to find that in between and you can still press a record. You know, so that's a work in progress.
How many cycles of the mother and the father pieces can you get before you have to recut those?
I generally find that you get up around 5 mothers, and you have to remember I've dealt with audiophile stuff for most of my pressing life, so you get to the point around 5 mothers. I think you're starting to look at probably either recutting or because you probably pressed a lot of records at that point. Stampers, you know, probably generally around 10 per mother, and then the mother's probably ready to. You know, sometimes you can get more. Depends on the fidelity and the handling. Mostly a mother goes down because of handling. And, you know, as far as fidelity and how many stampers are made, that's something we're experimenting with. We did a lot of that in the 80s, and we're going to replicate some of that and just see what that number really is.
Cool. A little more than a year ago, I think Vinyl Me Please talked about actually having tours. Will you have tours?
Oh, yes. The plant is being set up. It was set up in a way that made the most sense for tours. And that was the hardest part about the plant was, here's the demands. How do we make it work? You know, like you want plating first, pressing, then packaging, QC in between. It's going to be very customer friendly or you know, walk-in traffic friendly. We'll be doing a lot of tours.
Is that just to help promote the idea of vinyl playback?
Partly it's because of being in the Rhino Arts District. Westfield is the property management that's in the area that we're in. We're right across from the Mission Ballroom. They want a music-friendly area that's open to the public. So that's a big part of it right there.
But you don't see it as a hassle to have tours?
No, I've always been in places that had tours, but this one I'm a little bit more proud of because it's a nice environment.
Yeah.
At the front of the place, we'll have some retail space, and then we're talking about maybe a coffee bar or something like that, or beer. Well, Left Hand Brewing's right across the street, and we're talking about bringing theirs in. Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of we're working on getting the plant operational, and then we'll start working on the front end. You know, it's taken so long that we've got to start generating some income. So, because we are in it to try to survive, and that means making enough money to keep us open.
Do you have a time frame?
Middle of next month. Yeah, we're finally, and I'm sorry, I don't remember from one group to the next, but if I already said this, forgive me, but XL today was putting in our gas line because we have to have a high pressure gas line for the boilers. And the electrical's all done, but there's some meter finagling that has to be done. We have to move the electric meter to make way for the gas meter and then the gas meter. So it's kind of in XL's hands, and hopefully, you know, they've been working pretty well with us lately because they were a big holdup for us, and they realized that, and they're trying to make good on it. So I think by mid-March we should be starting up the presses, start doing our experimenting. Plating is operational now. I started getting good lacquers today, actually. My first 2 lacquers for Vinyl Me Please. So, and I'm slowly ramping that up because technically I don't think we're even supposed to be operating, but we're still in troubleshooting mode and figuring out the equipment. So I think that we're allowed under that. Yes.
Do you cut lacquers there?
Not yet, no, and we probably never will at that building, but we're talking about bringing mastering to Denver within the next couple of years. I think there's somebody here called Aardvark. Anybody ever heard of them? I think they're a mastering studio here, but yeah, Vinyl Me Please will have a mastering studio at some point. Probably, I'd say 2 to 3 years, maybe sooner than that. I hope. It's ideal to have a mastering studio right here. Is that it?
That's great.
Thank you very
Pretty
much.
informative. Thanks.